Welcome to the Mini Sculpting Super Show. I'm your host, Tom Mason, and today is the final part 3 of Tom's Sculpting Archives, year 2007. Angus, Guardian of the Northern Paths, is the very first and last miniature I ended up sculpting for a company in Poland called Dwarf Tail Miniatures. Their concept art was amazing, and they reached out to me because of my work. You know, they knew I liked dwarves, and obviously their whole premise was dwarves. And you know, I love this miniature. Technically, it's awesome. I think. You know, the concept art they wanted, it's a bit of a bland pose, but it's a nice, straightforward, single cast. But there were so many cool details on this thing, and I'm still a little surprised how well I captured them all, considering green stuff. I remember struggling on this one, but I just wanted it to look so good, because this is probably, even though I like the Reaper dwarves, this is probably the first dwarf that was really the kind of proportions and style that I really wanted to sculpt at this time. You know, big burly muscles, looking like they're short, but they, you know, you can't push them around. I mean, you'll if you try and push them, you'll fall over, and that's what they really had going for this. I'm a little bummed that I didn't get to do more work with them, but they had some really intricate contracts, we'll say, and had to go back and forth on them quite a bit to even do this one. And after that, it wasn't worth doing more work for them, but I'm really glad I got a chance to do this one, and I have some artist copies, and I really should paint it because this is a sweet figure. The Dwarf Pathfinder Grunt for Reaper's Warlord line. So I'd always loved dwarves. I always kind of wanted to be the dwarf guy, and this year really kind of solidified that. You know, I did the miners, and now went on to this Pathfinder miniature. This was another really fun piece to do. You can see I started to do a little bit of mixed media here. I have some like brown stuff I was using on the axe and shoulder, because I typically have been doing everything in green stuff, but it's a challenge to make really nice crisp stuff in green stuff, especially if you plan to file it. With that said, I was never a big fan of the brown stuff. Again, it could have been that my material was just really old, and it was old, so it could have just been worn out, but I found it to be quite brittle, so I usually ended up mixing in a little bit of green stuff, but I don't think I did on this miniature. I think it came along a little later in life. But another just stellar concept art provided to me by Talon, and it was so great to work from that art, because there's such fun details, and I just love translating them into miniature. The Marshall Illusionist for DGS. After looking at this guy, I'm remembering the Marshall. Yeah, they were definitely like an elven race. This was I'm much happier with this sculpt than I was the Marshall Swordsman. He's still he looks a little strange with how he's leaning back, but it's a lot more dynamic, especially when you consider that this is a single cast pose. I also really like how he did the face. I was trying, you know, over the years, sculptors would use different materials for different areas. You know, some people had a very specific mix of putty they would use for faces, and so I'm like, well, I think I might like Procreate more. I'm going to try it on here, and so it's always good to experiment with stuff like that. You know, sometimes it's not wise to just try and take the leap and make a whole miniature, because you can end up losing the whole thing if it's not working out. But you know, focusing on one small area like a face is a great way to kind of, you know, test out a new material before getting fully committed. And sheesh, did I ever make these progress photos small when I sent them to the customer? I'm pretty sure I did that because they were so particular about everything. I wanted them to look at the miniature in as close to its natural size as possible, because whenever you look at a miniature blown up, like in high resolution, like 2 or 3 times larger than it really is on a screen. It's cool to see the detail, but you also pick out stuff. Proportions look weird, and you might see little mistakes that never would show up on the casting or if you're looking at it in hand. But when you see it large on there, that's a pro tip right there. If you're working for a client, you want to make sure they can see these might be a little too small, but they were very stringent. And so if I gave them too much to view, they would pick at every little thing. So that's just a little strategy you can use to try and help manage your client. They don't always understand the production and little details as well as you might. They might, but you're looking at it in a very different way than they will. So it's the best thing to do is be able to show it to them in a way that will most accurately show what you've been doing. The Simcar Merchant was a fun, really straightforward miniature. Had a couple little details and finery, which is hard to see in these pictures on his tunic, but there really wasn't a lot of equipment, so I could really focus on just making a nice, fun, straightforward single cast pose. Put in what details there was, but it didn't take tons of time, because I had to make a bunch of different separate little bits individually and then tack them onto the miniature. You'll notice I also did this figure, his face in Procreate, so it was just, I wasn't happy with green stuff, but I wasn't sure. I was worried that it would be more of a challenge just completely jumping to all Procreate all the time, because I had such a rough time doing that first Dracula miniature all in Procreate. So I just decided to keep focusing on the faces, because I really didn't like how my faces were turning out with green stuff without a ton of work. So this was just a great way to just help me keep experimenting until I realized that I preferred it much more than green stuff and could do entire figures with it. Pathfinder Sergeant for Reaper's Warlord line. This was another figure for a new unit. Well, I think it actually went along with Pathfinder Grunt that I already did, but this was an entirely new sculpt. And man, it just occurred to me that I don't have concept art for most of Talon's artwork that I had to work on off these. I must not have kept it, but man, they're so fun to work on. And this character, the thing I like most about him, the sculpt, is just the way that I got his head looking off to the right, but the hood is still in place, as it would be pulled over his head. It wouldn't pull as much with his face, so he's almost kind of like looking into and through, past that part. And it's a subtle little detail that really gives this sculpt a lot of character. I was also starting to wean off of the brown stuff. I didn't quite do it on the axe, but on the shoulder pad I started using a little more Procreate, but still mainly a green self sculptor here. Oh, and I just realized that there's concept art. So yeah, awesome. There it is. But as you can see, I ended up coming up with a different pose for it, rather than just a guy standing there. This is the second Simcar Assassin miniature that I did for DGS. It was a totally different character, but still from that faction, but going at it a little bit different. He doesn't have a dagger or knife. He's got a nice sword and a really fancy scabbard, and he's got a little potion. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be poison or anything like that, but I like how this one turned out a lot more than the first Simcar Assassin. I thought some of his details were a little soft, and this is just it's a more confident pose. I think it'll work. It works. It's a single cast. You're not doing a bunch of cutting just for the sake of cutting. Man, I'm just remembering how small these miniatures were. It was really good experience though, because like I said, I had been doing stuff much larger and a bit more heroic, and so it really started to teach me how to do finer, more intricate details. And I probably never would have gotten to if I hadn't had all these commissions with these kind of smaller, elegant miniatures. The last figure of 2007 was the DGS. Let's see, how do you say this? Thormenalan the Mercenary. I don't know, something like that. And this was another character, just a nice, good, straightforward kind of single cast sculpt, but I was able to get a nice, elegant kind of movement to the character. This might also have been only my second time sculpting a crossbow on a miniature. And man, they're tough. They're just, I always thought they were very challenging trying to get that T-bar with the very fine, thin element on there. But it turned out very nice, and it was also very helpful that this guy had the crossbow slung over his shoulder like that, because one of the biggest challenges when sculpting a miniature with a crossbow is how you pose the model to either, if you want it single cast, you basically have to turn it like it is there, where the crossbar isn't going in towards the miniature, it's going parallel vertically. And so that's always a challenge when doing a figure or a sculpt, and I'm glad I didn't have to worry about it on this one. Thanks for watching another edition of Tom's Sculpting Archives. I hope it helped you see and understand just how you can develop over a year and over years as you watch the other archives from before and the ones I'm going to do in the future. Because in the end, what you really got to do is keep sculpting.